here is very different than the soil at UBC Farm, and the whole farming operation is very different, so the soil is managed very differently. I'm going to go over some of the biggest differences and management factors at both farms, which are soil texture, difference in soil texture, difference in water management, difference in nutrient management, and crop management. So I'll explain all those in more detail. But first I'm going to give a quick geological history of the area, and let me know if I'm talking too fast or if you don't understand something. So this area before the last glaciation was ocean, and then after the last glaciation we're still very close to the ocean. It was still kind of almost like an estuary. Fresh water from lakes was flowing here, but it was still attached to the ocean. Those rivers were bringing in very fine sediments, clays and silts, that eventually built up in this area and kind of built up the level of the ground in relation to sea level, so that it was above sea level, so that this wasn't anymore, it wasn't the ocean, it was kind of like a very shallow lake. And in this lake, lots of vegetation was being deposited into it, and because in water it's under anaerobic conditions, there's no oxygen, organic matter breaks down very, very slowly, so it accumulates faster than it can break down. So there was a nice layer of organic matter, making it perfect for, organic matter is perfect for agriculture. But the layer of water was a problem. So I think in the 1800s or early 1900s the area was drained so that people could settle here and so that the area could be farmed. So the soil that we have here is the product of those very fine materials that were brought in from the river. So it's very fine material, it's very clayey. I was going to bring water and paper towels so you get hand texture again, but I forgot. So feel free to grab the soil, but I don't have any water to wash your hands after. And if you can see into the pit, big little pieces. So if you guys can see into the pit, you see how slick it is at the side there? That's the clay. It's very pushed together, it's very slick. At UBC Farm it was more of sandy soil, so it looked very different, had a very different texture. So, and some very fancy diagrams for you. So this is UBC Farm soil. These are the sand particles. So they're very big in relation to clay. The pore space here is very large, so water can just drain right through. And that's why the soil there was droughty, and it had problems holding onto the water. So this is the soil here. These are all the tiny little clay particles. As you can see, there's lots of pore spaces, but they're tiny. So water just kind of sits in the pores, and the soil becomes clogged, like saturated with water, and it doesn't drain very well. So these pores like to be about 50% water and 50% soil, or 50% water and 50% air. So these ones have a tendency to have more air than water, which is a problem. And these soils here have a tendency to have more water than air, so that's also a problem. So these soils don't drain very well, and they get a similar amount of precipitation as UBC Farm, so they tend to get waterclogged. As well, we're in a valley of a valley, very low. The land lies very low, so the water table is very high, very close to the surface. So the roots can actually just reach that water table and get access to their water supply. So irrigation is not very necessary here. However, that water table is salty because we are so close to the ocean, and they do not want that water table to rise up, because then all these pores here will become saturated with water, and plants won't be able to get what they need out of the air, because there will be no air in these pores, and so plants won't be able to grow. So it's very important that they keep the water table low here, and that they keep all that the soils drained of the water from the rain. So they have lots of sub irrigation here at the farm, and I tried to find an example of what it looks like because when I came 2 years ago there was a little chart of it. I couldn't find any today, but it's basically just kind of like, I guess, pipes almost that act like big soil or big channels for the water to drain through and enter down to the water table.
There's also nitrate levels pretty high over here too, isn't it?
And that's because of, I think that's over
Industry.
yeah. So I'll talk about that in a bit. So the water when it's drained, just like at UBC farm where it drains naturally, when water leaves the soil, it carries a lot of the bases with it, which is what prevents the soil from becoming acidic. So when that water drains with those bases, the soil becomes acidic, so they add lime back to the soil, which is calcium carbonate, and so they do the same thing at UBC farm, and that's to keep the pH around 6. So when these soils, they're very clay, I'm trying to think wet. You can kind of, you know what clay feels like, and you can kind of just like push it and it will go into whatever, when it's wet, it will go into whatever form you mold it. So these soils will do the same thing when they're wet. So if you step on it, it just pushes right down, all this pore space gets lost. So if you came in when this soil was waterlogged after a big rain, and you stepped on it, it would cause big compaction, and then it would really reduce the ability of plants to access water and stuff and nutrients in the pores, because there'd be way less pores. They'd just be collapsed. So they have to be very careful about putting heavy equipment on the soil when it's when the ground is wet. So in the spring they might want to get out and start their crop, but they can't because the soil is soggy. So they have to wait. And maybe in the fall they would want to be planting something, but they can't because the soil is wet. They can't get their machines on there. So it really limits what they can do in the kind of shoulder seasons. So a quick water comparison between the two farms. UBC farm is droughty, and this is because of the porous particles with the lots of pore space, so water just drains through. They need irrigation in the summer. Kitzel farm is waterlogged, and this is due to the very fine particles that don't drain water well as the high water table. So subsurface drainage is so important here. Also, they have a limited ability to use machinery because of compaction issues. And so the next big issue is the nutrient and fertility management. The soils here have very high cation exchange capacity. You guys all think you're ready? Should I slow down a little bit? Yeah? Okay.
I have a question. So if they're liming the soil every year and basically the bases are being taken away into the water, does that have consequences to the water system? Yeah. And what are they?
Well, what happens here is they almost have nutrient overloading on this system because of there's so much manure. There's so many cows on this small area of land. They have very nutrient-rich manure, and that's put back onto the soil. And so it either is absorbed into the soil and used up by the plant. Some will drain into the water table. The rest of it, if it's put on at a time of year where it's really wet and there's nothing growing like now, it'll just drain off right into that water. And all of those nutrients enter into the water supply. They cause a huge boom of growth. So a whole bunch of algae will grow in plants. They kind of like use up all the oxygen in the water and cause a dead zone. And that's called eutrophication. And so it's very, very negative. It just kind of destroys the livability of the water for everything that lived there. So nutrient overloading is a big problem, especially in animal systems, because of manure and waste and that sort of thing. And just because this is so close to the water table, they have to be really